Welcome. I would like to welcome you to episode 412 of the Unpopular Podcast. This is the man, the myth, the legend, Jalen Hunter. And here at the Unpopular Podcast, I'm not only asking you to agree with me, I'm asking you to hear me out. We have finally arrived to what most people say is the most exciting time in sports all year, and that is the official start of March Madness. Now, yes, I understand that it's March, 20th? I'm not saying that it's the start of March. I'm saying the start of March Madness. College basketball's crescendo. Their playoffs, if you will. It is an exciting time. And I think it's, I know, obviously, betting is a thing, and the allure of possibly making money is a thing. But in my opinion, the reason why March Madness and the college playoffs, if you will, is so exciting and so fun to watch and participate, and why it's such a spectacle every year is because of the danger of the feel of being one and done. There's no playoffs. There's no 4 games. You got to win 4-game series. It is literally, if you win, you are in. If you're out, or if you lose, you're out. And obviously this episode, we're going to discuss the men's side of the bracket and the women's side of the bracket. I'm going to describe, talk about some teams, talk about some sleepers, give my prediction of who's going to win both sides. But what's interesting about these last few years, and this has been more on the men's than the women's, and of course I'll talk about it more later on in the episode, but we are seeing parity throughout all of college sports. Now, yes, I'm not saying that that a D3 school is going to ultimately come in and beat a D1 school. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is, whether we talk about the transfer portal, whether we talk about just the sheer amount of talent around the league, players' teams are better than they've ever been, which makes March even more exciting because, especially on the men's side, you get more and more upsets. And that's honestly what we're here for. We're here for upsets. People can say they want this team to win, they want that team to win. People can say they want dynasties. No, what's exciting for people is the potential of an upset. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start on the men's side, and I'm going to just have a conversation with you guys. Just a heads up, this entire episode is going to be about March Madness. First half of the episode is on the men's side. Second half is on the women's. I'll put the timestamps in the description, but let's start with the number ones. And this is probably the first year where first year in a while, let me say, that every single number one is drastically different. Now, I think that there isn't let me say that. There's one team that is dominant in college basketball. That doesn't mean that I think they're going to necessarily win easily, but there is one team that is dominant in college basketball on the men's side, and that is the UConn Huskies. Look, I think Florida was the last time there's been a back-to-back champion. And it's so hard in college sport or college basketball to have a back-to-back champion because there's so many factors that you have to fight with. You have to fight with the transfer portal. You have to fight with kids going to the NBA, kids graduating, people around your conference getting better. It is incredibly difficult in college sports to repeat. But if there was ever a team that I think was good enough to repeat, and looks like the path for them to repeat is wide open, it would be this UConn Huskies team. Now, again, I'm not going to spoil who I have winning it until a little later on, but what are the factors that you need to be a good team, to be a dominant team in college basketball. I think college basketball is probably the one place where a veteran, experienced, and good guard is extremely important. You can say, what about the NBA? Well, yeah, but there's a lot of instances like the Lakers and LeBron James where while you can say he's a big guard and he has guard-like skills, their point guard, which I think is D'Angelo Russell, he is not their best player. I'm not saying that a guard has to be their best player, but they have to be one of their best players. And when you look at every single number one team, whether that's UConn, whether that's Purdue, whether that's Houston or North Carolina, they have incredible guard play. And sticking with UConn, the reason why they're so fascinating is because they are literally built like a NBA team. And the interesting part is they saw a bunch of players last year after winning the national championship leave and go to the NBA. So you would think after you go to the championship, you lose your two best players, that it's I'm not gonna say a rebuild year, but they're not gonna be as great as you'd think because of those factors. Well, when you look today, I would go as far as to say that this UConn team is better than last year's team. Whether you talk about the emergence, I know Tristan Newton was good last year, but whether you talk about how good Tristan Newton has been or how good Donovan Clingan has been, I apologize, has been, this team is stacked, man. They have, man, I didn't even talk about Cam Spencer, Alex Cabana. Like, it is, they have 5 players that average 10 or more points. That's not, especially in the college game, that doesn't really happen as much, especially on the men's side, because there is a women's team that we're going to talk about that a lot of their players average more than 10. But UConn is just a team that it's hard for me to pick anyone over them. Again, I will give my predictions a little later, but UConn is great. And especially seeing as though what they lost, how they look this year, their relationship with Dan Hurley, who was the coach, he's one of the best coaches, if not the best coach in college basketball right now, at least on the men's side. It is, you would be hard. Again, if there was ever a time where it was safe to pick a team to repeat, this would be the year. That's how good this UConn Huskies team is. And there are some issues. There's not one team in college sports, men or women, that doesn't have an issue. For UConn, they can go through defensive droughts. They can go through offensive droughts. Every team does. But, when they're not hitting shots, it does open room and leave room for you to essentially possibly win another team, obviously. Again, I'm not going to go as far as to say that they're just ultimately going to lose. I'm just saying that their weakness is there were games, obviously they lost 3 times. There were games that if they're not making shots, and there are times when their offense definitely dictates their defense, it can get scary for them. But they are head and shoulders, in my opinion, the best team in college basketball. Now, there are 4 number ones, UConn being one of them. I think the number 2 overall is actually, you know what? No, we're just going to say another number 1 is Houston. Houston is interesting. Houston is probably the one team that plays like an old school team. Houston is probably that one team in college basketball where if you want to point to a team that definitely has old school principles and old school tactics to get the job done, it is Houston. The beauty about Houston is every single game they play looks the same. Win, lose, or draw, they look the same. No, they're not the best offensively. In fact, out of the number ones, they're probably one of the worst offensively. But what they lack in offense, they for sure make up in defense. They are one of the best suffocating defenses in college basketball. And while, yes, LJ Cryer, who was their best scorer, he averages 15 points. When you get Jamal Sheed and Emmanuel Sharp and Juwan Roberts, and Damian Dunn, they can suffocate you. And when you look at a Houston game, now it's not as bad as Virginia. Let me first say, their offense is not as bad as Virginia. Virginia, I think, is the one team in this tournament that their offense is probably the worst offense and that's even the 16 seeds. Like, I think I'd probably pick Howard's offense, and that's no offense to Howard. I'd probably pick Howard's offense over Virginia. Virginia offense is just god awful. But Houston's offense isn't too far away. Now, they do hit threes at a good rate, but their defense is great, and they have experience on their side. I mean, again, LJ Cryer is great. Jamal Sheed, both of those are returning players. The thing about Houston is it's very difficult to predict the ending, I'll say, of a Houston game, because as we saw against Iowa State, it just didn't go their way at all. But most of their games look low scoring and just suffocating. They're a great team. And another thing that they don't do, I will say that they don't do that much, is play down to their competition. There's one team that we're about to talk about that definitely does that on occasion. But Houston usually is very steadfast in how they play. They stick to their guns, and they're extremely good. They're a great team and definitely deserve to be number one. Now, let's talk about Purdue for a second, which is another number one team. What Purdue has a very interesting, let's say, road to the playoffs, and Purdue is fighting something that no other team in this tournament is fighting, and that is history. I don't think there's been, at least in recent memory, there hasn't been a more underachieving number one than the Purdue Boilermakers. They became one of the teams that lost to a 16 seed, I think. They've had Zach Edey, who this is the second year in a row that he won the Player of the Year, and he has been arguably the most dominant basketball player in college basketball, at least on the men's side. It's very hard when you look at this recipe for Purdue, they have it, man. They have Zach Edey, they have Brandon Smith, they have Lance Jones, they have Fletcher Lawyer, all score over 10 points. Zach Edey scores 24 points a game and averages 12 rebounds a game. But you know what it is? History. People outside of teams know history just as much as people inside teams. And I'm not saying that they're going to lose to a 16 seed. I'm not saying that they're not good. But what I'm saying is there could be an instance, maybe the second round, maybe the Sweet 16, where the game is closer than you would expect it to be. Then you start having to fight thoughts and fight past demons, like, oh shoot, they just came back on us, or oh shoot, this game is a lot closer than it's supposed to be, and that can ultimately lose you games. On top of that, they arguably have the best player in college basketball, and they lean on him a lot. The issue though is if teams are able to just load the box with Zach Edey, if teams are able to get him out of the paint, then you have to rely on a Brandon Smith and a Lance Jones to hit shots and hit threes. And while they can do that, if they don't, they're going to lose. I mean, I think Purdue is a good team. Do not get me wrong. Defensively, they're a really good team, especially when we talk about rim protection. I mean, Zach Edey averages 2.2 blocks a game. But the issue is, if you take Zach Edey out of the game, which say you get a team that is, I'm not going to say as big as Zach Edey. I think he's 7'2" or 7'3", so I don't think that's really the case. But you get a team more physical than Purdue. You get a team that their big man can shoot the ball really well, so that takes Zach Edey out of the paint. Then you possibly have a long day if you're Purdue. But I will say that Purdue has definitely earned their way to be a number one seed. They have the best player in college basketball, arguably, and it's going. I think it's a good recipe to they feed off their big man. And it would be dumb of them not to, seeing as though how they're built, So I think the Purdue Boilermakers, if they're able to get over that mental hump and if they're able to get over the past, because again, just as much as fans and people looking at the game know the past, the teams know it as well. And it's harder for them because they have to fight it, because just as much as people will talk about, oh, shoot, they struggled with a 16 seed or they struggled in the second round, they're going to hear that too, and it kind of creeps in. So I think, Purdue is a good team, and they have the best player. But they're also a team that if you get them if they get the wrong matchup, it can be a long day for them. So let's talk about it. For people that know me, for people that obviously listen to this podcast, I appreciate you guys. You guys know that I am a big North Carolina fan. North Carolina is my favorite overall team. And I will admit that I was as shocked as a lot of people were to see how good North Carolina was this year. I'm always going to ride with my team, and I'm always going to support my team. But when you lose a player like Caleb Love, who was so much of the offense last year, I didn't expect North Carolina to not only be better than last year, but be better in every aspect, like every phase last year. Yes, we brought back RJ Davis. Yes, we brought back Armando Bacot. We have really good transfer players like Harrison Ingram, like Cormac Ryan. I just didn't know what we were going to look like. I will say this about North Carolina. When North Carolina plays at their best, when North Carolina comes to play, when North Carolina puts their foot on the throttle, I don't know if there's any team in the country that can beat them. When you have ACC Player of the Year RJ Davis playing at a high level, when you have Armando Bacot dominating the paint, Elliot Cadeau, who's a freshman, he has been incredible. I think he was all ACC freshman team. He's great, especially when we talk about assists. I think he averages like 4 assists a game. And when Cormac Ryan's hitting shots, because he hasn't hit shots at a clip in which you would hope for, especially coming, being such a sharpshooter that he was. But as we saw when they played against Duke, I think the second time, I think he had like 30 points or something like that. This team can beat you a myriad of ways. And I think the most important player, yes, RJ Davis is incredibly important, and he's probably he is our MVP, and he needs to have a good game. But Brady Manick, one of the biggest reasons why North Carolina made it all the way to the national championship 2 years ago was because of the play of Brady Manick. Now, yes, Caleb Love was great. He hit the big shot against Duke in the Final Four. But Brady Manick, his ability to stretch the floor, his leadership, his ability to hit big shots, he was the key piece to ultimately get us, and that is North Carolina, to the national championship. Now, yes, we ultimately lost to Kansas, but that Brady Manick was our key piece to get us there. I'm not saying he was our best player, but he was our key piece. Well, Harrison Ingram is this North Carolina's version of Brady Manick. Well, no, he's not the greatest, or he's not as good a three-point shooter as Brady Manick was. He is an incredible rebounder. He's an incredible player. He averages 12 points. He averages 9 rebounds. He shoots 37% from the three. He is great. He does a little bit of everything, which is important for this team, especially when you talk about the old North Carolina teams. They're used to be smash mouth in the paint. They like to control the paint. They're usually a great rebounding team, and this North Carolina team looks a lot like that. Whether we talk about Armando Bacot, whether we talk about Harrison Ingram, this team looks eerily similar to a lot of the championship North Carolina teams. Has a really good guard, whether we talk about Ty Lawson, whether we talk about Joe Barry. We have R.J. Davis. So now the biggest issue, and I mean the biggest issue with North Carolina, and why a lot of people don't have much faith in North Carolina, is North Carolina is one of the only teams where when they're playing, it's like a light switch. When they're playing the way that they know how to play, when they're playing their best, they are almost unbeatable. But when they're playing their worst, when they're playing when things aren't clicking, it's like their high is that's it. Their ceiling is incredibly high. Their ceiling is national championship. Their floor, oh my gosh, their floor is hell. Like they can play bad. Whether we talk about bad turnovers, whether we talk about poor shot selection, going away from game plan. That's why a lot of people have pause, and that's kind of the pause that I have for this team. Again, I have all the faith in the world in North Carolina. I'll give you my prediction later, but North Carolina just it's like we saw against NC State in the ACC championship. When they're not hitting shots or they're not controlling the paint, it can get bad for North Carolina. They start turning the ball over a lot. They start taking a lot of bad threes. It can be bad. But when they're at their best, which we saw with Duke twice or which we saw with someone like Florida State, their defense is suffocating at times, especially coming from R.J. Davis and Elliot Cadeau, and they control the paint. So Harrison Ingram and they are really good. I think Seth Trimble is probably our best on-ball defender from the guard position. The issue is he just can't shoot to save his life. But yeah, North Carolina, their ceiling is incredibly high, but their floor is incredibly low, and that's the biggest issue with this number one seed, or with them being a number one seed. Now, there's always teams that have high expectations going in, and whether we talk about injury, whether we talk about just not reaching those expectations, there's always one or two things that get in their way. And there are a few teams in this I guess you can say in the tournament that can underachieve. And I'm really looking at two teams, and a lot of it is because of injury. The first team I'm looking at is Kansas. Getting Hunter Dickinson, you thought you going into it, you thought that Kansas was going to be one of those teams. It's just like, this is one of those Kansas teams that go really far. This team they have veteran leadership in Dijon Harris, who obviously won a national championship with them. You'd think that this Kansas team was going to be good. And they are good when they're firing on all cylinders. The issue is they're kind of banged up. Their best player, Kevin McClare, he's injured. You have Hunter Dickinson. I know he separated his shoulder. I don't know how healthy he's going to be. On top of their health, there have been a myriad of games where this year they just have not been their best, or their best isn't good enough. And a lot of people had them as a preseason favorite to make it out of, I'll just say to make it to the national championship. But I think that this team, especially when we talk about their injuries, there's a shot that they could lose. I'm not going to say they can lose to Western Kentucky. Wish they could. No offense to Western Kentucky, but this team can. Because of their injuries, they could make it. They could fall. They could not make it out the first weekend. That's how bad this Kansas team can play, and especially when their two best players essentially are injured. You don't know. And on top of that, they have three players, again, Kevin McClare, Hunter Dickinson, and KJ Adams. They have three players that average more than 12 points. Everyone else is 8, 8, 4, 4, 2, 1, So, yeah, I just don't think – I'm not going to say overrated because that's kind of disrespectful. I will say that the expectations that were on Kansas going into the season, they have not reached. And obviously, everyone can make a run. You never know. And they still have some big-name players if they're healthy. But I just don't think that Kansas is going to be one of those teams. I will say this. Kansas is going to be one of those teams where you look up and they can lose in the second round, or they can ultimately be in a dogfight the first round, even though they are a 2 seed, I believe. They can fumble. So those are one of those teams. Another team that I think definitely has a potential to lose early is Marquette. And that's solely because of injuries. I don't know how good Tyler let me think about this. Their best player is Tyler Kolek. Apologize. I will say this. I think pure point guard, he is probably the best pure point guard in college basketball. And shouts out to Shaka Smart. I think he's an incredible coach. But when you're going into a tournament and you don't know if your best player, especially arguably the best point guard in college basketball, is going to be healthy, that is a recipe for disaster. Now, again, I'm not saying that there's no shot. But what I'm saying is that puts an onus on a lot of other players that they may have to do things that they're not really prepared to do. And we've seen that on a numerous amount of occasions this season where here's the important people ask, what are the importance of a point guard? Outside of course, distribute the ball and everything. And for some point guards, like let's say Steph Curry, they had a lot of their offense goes through him, and a lot of offense, especially shooting the balls for Steph. But a point guard is looked to be the conductor of the offense. And on top of that, when things going awry, when things are not clicking, when the team isn't doing well, you pretty much look to the point guard to settle things down. You look to the point guard to slow things down and to get everyone back on a level whether we talk about emotionally. When your point guard's not there, that there's a lot of people that don't know how to do that or don't have that in them. Again, Tyler Kolek is probably the best point guard in the nation. Whether we talk about assisting the ball, the issue is we don't know if he's healthy, and if he's not healthy, Marquette can find themselves out incredibly early. That's how important he is to his team. So injuries are probably going to play a part. It always does, unfortunately. But yeah, I just don't think that. I think it's going to be tough. I think it's going to be tough for. It's going to be tough if someone like Hunter Dickerson is not healthy for Kansas, or someone like Tyler Kolek is not healthy for Marquette. But we'll see. Along with some underachieving teams or disappointing teams, there's always teams that kind of rise above the occasion. There's always those San Diego States or those Florida Atlantics or those St. Peter's teams that you look up and they're making an incredible run. And we have some this year in the field. I think probably the biggest one is James Madison. James Madison's only lost like 3 times this year. They're probably one of the most slept on teams in the tournament. Now, I will say that they're obviously they have some huge wins. They have a win over Michigan State, who's also in the tournament. They have some. James Madison can put up points in a bunch, man, and they're probably one of the most slept on teams and one of the most least talked about teams that are really good. They have a shot of making a deep run in the playoffs. I think the only issue is matchups, and that's the problem with almost every team. There's some unfavorable matchups for other ones. Like, for instance, North Carolina has if Mississippi State beats Michigan in the first round, that is an unfavorable matchup for North Carolina. I do think that North Carolina ultimately is going to win that. But Mississippi State is, especially when we talk about their size and we talk about their shooting ability, is a much tougher matchup than a Michigan State, who isn't that big of a team and struggles offensively a lot. Not saying that both teams aren't good, but it's about matchups. I'll give you another one. UConn, a very tough matchup for UConn is probably. Now they would probably meet they would have to meet obviously in the national championship, but a tough matchup for UConn is Purdue because of their size. UConn is probably one of the biggest teams in college basketball. Well, another team that is big in college basketball is Purdue. Matchups won't be there. So the size advantage, whether we talk about Clingan or Newton, it's not that big of an advantage that it would be for a team like Iowa State. But James Madison, they can put points on the board. They're one of the best scoring teams in the league, and I think that they could be a sleeper, and you can look up, and they're good enough to make it to the Sweet 16 or the Elite 8. It's just about matchups, but I think that they're could be good. Another team that isn't talked about a lot that has a shot to going deep in the tournament is St. Mary's. Now that kind of scares me because they're on the North Carolina west side of the bracket, but they have 5 players that average over 10 points. And what they do is they dribble the hell out the ball. They don't score that much, but they are a suffocating defense, and their offense is so good. Excuse me. Oof. Down the wrong hole. Pause. Their offense is so good that, and I mean in a way of, if they have a lead, a 5-point lead kind of feels like a 10, 15-point lead with St. Mary's because of how they're able to control the clock and how they're able to, maneuver and operate when they have the lead. It is tough, and they have some big dudes, man. Like Harry Wessel is good. They have Joshua Jefferson is pretty good. Yeah, man, that's gonna be that. This is a team that is extremely slept on, probably because they play in the Mount West Conference. But Aiden Manley is good. Augusta Marsalianos. I know I messed your name up, bro. I apologize. This team can shoot the ball. They have, I think, Augustus is probably one of the best 3-point shooters, I'm not mistaken, in the country. They definitely can make a run, especially when we talk about matchups. That's another matchup that would be tough for North Carolina because of just how good they shoot the ball and how North Carolina they have a girth advantage, but they don't really have a size advantage when we talk about St. Mary's. But they can definitely make a deep run. And I think the biggest sleeper in this entire tournament is TCU. TCU has one of the best scorers in college basketball, Emmanuel Miller. And they also have Jameer Nelson Jr. This team is a scrappy team. Now, kind of like North Carolina, their ceiling is incredibly high. That is TCU. Their ceiling is incredibly high. Their floor is incredibly low, though. There are times when they struggle shooting the ball, but they do get to the rim really well. The issue is they're not the biggest team, and I think that what they lack in height, they make up for in defense. Again, they're probably one of the most scrappiest teams in college basketball, and this team is good enough. I think they're like an 8 or 9 seed. This team is good enough to definitely, let's say, I will say this. I think I'm not going to give my entire bracket, obviously, but I think I had them beating Utah State in the first round, meaning they would have to play Purdue in the second round. I think they have a good shot of beating Purdue because they just, I mean, they shoot 38. Let me see. Their 3-point percentage is 38%, 31%, 31%, 40%, 42%, 38%. Like, they can shoot the ball. So I think one of the biggest sleepers in this is TCU. And I think TCU can make a deep, deep, deep playoff run or tournament run. So the question is simple. Who do I have winning? So I'll admit I don't enjoy making brackets because it's kind of like fantasy football, man. Like, I do it, but I don't really like playing fantasy football because I watch the games differently. Like, I get more upset, especially if I have a fantasy team and I have a player that isn't playing well and he's on my fantasy. So making brackets isn't the most fun to me, but I understand it. And like we talked about at the top of the show, parity runs throughout men's college basketball. More on the men's than the women's, obviously, but definitely men's college basketball. And I say that because I can see an avenue where every single team, not every single team, let me back up, where a lot of teams can win. Like, I can see an avenue where North Carolina wins, obviously, or Mississippi State wins, or St. Mary's wins, or McNeese wins, which is another sleeper that I didn't really talk about, or South Carolina, who's had an incredible run, wins, or Texas A&M wins, or Duke wins. You know, like, there's a path for a lot of teams. I'm gonna give you my Final Four. My Final Four, I have UConn, North Carolina. The biggest concern I have with North Carolina obviously is one of those games where they're just not hitting anything, or maybe they have a bad matchup, or they're just down, another team is dominating the paint, kind of like what NC State did in the national champion or ACC championship. And I'm also nervous about North Carolina playing Arizona. That's the Caleb Love reunion. It didn't really work out with Caleb Love at North Carolina the year after making it to the national championship. And he obviously went to Arizona, and that's going to be a big game. You have the ACC Player of the Year in RJ Davis going against the Pac-12 Player of the Year, which was Caleb Love. That game kind of concerns me. But I have UConn and North Carolina in the Final Four on one side. UConn, to me, like I stated before, is the best team in college basketball. Their toughest opponent is probably Auburn or in Iowa State. But again, UConn is just supremely talented, and they have a size advantage on both Auburn and Iowa State. So I just think they probably have an easier run to the Final Four, in my opinion, even though they do have some tough teams. Like Illinois is tough. Iowa State's tough. I think Drake is one of those teams that can definitely make some noise in the playoffs, or make some noise in this tournament. There's some tough teams, but I just think UConn is supremely talented. In North Carolina, I'm gonna ride with them until the wheels fall off. I have North Carolina making it to one side of the Final Four. The next, on the other side, I have Houston. I think Houston has one of the toughest roads, because if you look on the South side or the South bracket, you have James Madison, who we just talked about. You have Duke. You have NC State, who just won the AC tournament. You have Texas Tech, and you have Kansas. Kentucky. Let me talk about Kentucky for a second, and why my faith for Kentucky, it's me and Kentucky have an interesting relationship. Kentucky has the two best freshmen in college basketball. And I also think that's kind of interesting that they both don't start, whether that's Rob I forgot his name. Oh man, I do not know how. Give me a second. I apologize. How did I forget? I'm going to say his name right. That's why I apologize. People, thank you for your So, there you go. You have the two arguably best freshmen in college basketball, and that's Robert Dillingham and Reed Sheppard. Reed Sheppard came, he only played 26 games. Oh no, he only played 32 games. He came on the scene, bro. Kentucky is one of the best offensive teams in basketball. The issue with Kentucky is they do not play a lick of defense. Like, Antonio Reeves is great. Trey Mitchell is great. DJ Wagner has been okay. And again, you have the two best freshmen in college basketball, Robert Dillingham and Reed Sheppard, especially Reed Sheppard. But they don't play a lick of defense. And I have Kentucky and Houston making it to the Elite Eight. The issue is, I just think defense is going to reign supreme over that matchup, because again, Houston doesn't play that good offense, but they play incredible defense, and vice versa. Kentucky does not play a lick of defense, but they're one of the best offensive teams. But so I have Houston on the other side of the Final Four, and I think out of all the number one seeds, I think Purdue is the weakest. Now, I know that if you look at the ranks and everything, Purdue is ranked higher than North Carolina, but I think if they get the wrong matchup, which there is the wrong matchup out there, they could possibly lose. And spoiler alert, I have TCU beating them in the second round. I think they can go as far as obviously making it all the way to the national championship, but they can go or get bounced as early as the second round, in my opinion. And I have TCU beating them. I will say this though: if Zach Edey was not here, if Zach Edey was not in college basketball, the best player by a country mile, in my opinion, in college basketball would be Dalton Kinchey. Oh, I'm sorry, Kincaid. What am I talking? Dalton Kincaid from Tennessee. Dalton Kincaid is a bucket. Not only is he a bucket, he has incredibly increased his NBA stock. He is, again, if it wasn't for Zach Edey, Dalton Kincaid would be the best player in college basketball by a long margin. And I think that Tennessee has one of the best shots of making it to the Final Four. So my Final Four is UConn, North Carolina, as well as Houston and Tennessee. As much as I love North Carolina, as much as I want to see a historic franchise add another national championship, as much as I want to see my favorite team in sports, that means if I have one team that I can watch and nothing else, it would be North Carolina. I think our dream season ends in the Final Four. Again, from what I've seen all year, it is hard for me to have witnessed how good UConn has been and think that anybody, at least on this side, can beat them. I think UConn is the best team by far. And North Carolina played UConn, and while there were times when it was back and forth, UConn broke away, and which they normally do. That's another thing that UConn does better than any team. Like, they can extend the lead quicker than I have seen in recent memory over a college basketball team. Like, I remember I was watching the game. I don't remember who they were playing, but UConn was struggling. Like, I think they were up maybe 2 or 3 points. I go to the bathroom. I come back, and UConn is up 15. Now, mind you, I wasn't in the bathroom for that long. They went from a 2 to 3 point lead to a 15-point lead. Like, the crowd going crazy. I'm like, dog. And they've done that so many times this year. It is crazy. I have UConn. You know what? Spoiler alert, man. I have UConn winning it all for the men's national. I know that's a popular take, seeing as though a lot of people have UConn winning, but I'm one of those people. UConn just a better team. I do have Tennessee making it over Houston to the national championship because they have obviously arguably the second best player in college basketball in Dalton, but I don't think anyone's going to be UConn. I just don't. I could be wrong, obviously. If I am wrong, hey, we'll see it live because, hey, but my bracket has UConn winning it all. That's just what I have. I think they're by far the best team in college basketball, and it's you have to bring your A+++ game to be UConn, and honestly, I don't even know if that is enough a lot of times. I said this probably a month ago in one of my episodes, and I think I put a clip out for it. UConn, this feels like one of those times where, just like Villanova when they had Dante DiVincenzo, when they had Jalen Brunson, when they had Mikal Bridges, Eric Pascal, or the Kyle Guy Virginia team, this looks like one of those teams where they're just leaps and bounds better than everyone. And DeAndre Hunter was on that Virginia team. They're just leaps and bounds better than everyone, and they're probably, I'm not going to say going to destroy everyone, but their head and shoulders better than everyone. And I think it's going to be a massive upset if they lose before they make it at least to the national championship. So that's my prediction on the men's side. Let's go over to the women's side. And what is so fascinating about the women's side, man, is the women's basketball has been more exciting, at least I'm say the last few years, than the men's side. I've talked about this ad nauseum. I put a clip out just last episode that it's easier and it's more exciting to follow the women's game this year than it is the men's because of the names that they have. Whether we talk about Camila Cardozo, whether we talk about Cameron Brink, whether we talk about Caitlin Clark, Angel Reese, Anissa Morrow. There is so many names that you can attach yourself to and teams that you can attach yourself to. And on the women's side, the number ones are South Carolina, Iowa, USC, and Texas. I talked about parity on the men's side. There isn't much parity on the women's side. And it's very because there are just teams, coaches that are better than others. You don't really see, you do see them sometimes. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it never happens, but you don't really see too much upsets in the women's basketball. I think the biggest upset in recent memory was a couple years ago when Stanford lost, I think in like the second round. And why that was so shocking and so surprising is because, again, you do not see a lot of upsets in women's college basketball because the talent at the top is just so much better than the rest that it kind of works itself out. I will say this, though. When you look at the landscape of the women's side of the college basketball region or regions, there is a lot more good teams than there is bad teams. Like, there's usually great teams and then okay to bad teams. Now it's great teams and good teams. Now, I know that like, Jalen, what are you talking about? Just hear me out, man. Just hear me out. Okay, I'll give you a prime example. Texas is playing Driscoll the first matchup. I obviously have Texas winning, but Driscoll isn't a bad team. They're a good team. They're just not on Texas level. Texas is a great team. San Diego State is a really good team. Utah is a really good team. So I just, you don't see a lot of upsets. You don't see there's not as much parity as you think. Usually the best teams or the best players essentially win in the women's side. And when you look, the number one seeds definitely deserve to be the number one seed. South Carolina is South Carolina. Don Staley is the best coach in college basketball, in my opinion. The way that they're able to lose, and I mean, you lost to Leah Boston last year, who was obviously the best player in college basketball. You come back, and not only are you essentially probably better this year than you were last year, you haven't lost a game. Now, yes, their games aren't as blowouty as they've been, but they're still incredible. So South Carolina being the number one overall seed, it kind of feels like the same. I kind of feel the same way about South Carolina as far as their dominance and their road to the national championship. How I feel about UConn on the men's side, it's going to be incredibly tough to beat them. Iowa has the best player. Caitlin Clark is the best player in women's college basketball by a long shot. She is going to be the number one overall pick in the WNBA draft. And while I will say this, it's not just Caitlin Clark. Don't get me wrong. Like, I think when people hear Iowa basketball, all they think of is Caitlin Clark, and rightfully so. Like, she is obviously their best player. But they obviously the players aren't as good as Caitlin Clark. I will say that, but there are other people. You know, Hannah Suwecki. I know I said your name wrong. I apologize. She's pretty good. Kate Martin is pretty good. Like, they have some pieces. They're Caitlin Clark averages 31.9 points a game. That is incredible. So they definitely deserve to be a 1 seed. Texas has been great as well. They are probably one of the most balanced teams in college basketball. They can beat you. They're probably one of the best scoring teams also in college basketball. Texas definitely deserves to be a 1. It was sort of a bumpy road, and I do think that in that region it's going to be tough for them because Stanford also deserves to be number 1 with Cameron Brink, but they lost late in the season, and that kind of hurt them. And I think Texas has a tough road, man. You have to go against Florida State. You have to go against Utah. You have to go against Tennessee, possibly. NC State. Maryland is a very underrated 10 seed. And, yeah, it's going to be tough. But Texas has been consistent throughout the year, so shouts out to them. And USC. USC is one of the – they have arguably the second best scorer in women's college basketball, and that's Juju Watkins. For her to be a freshman doing what she's doing, scoring the way she's scoring, it definitely is – it's awe-inspiring. I will say that. So the number one seeds are definitely deserving of number 1s, and I don't really there's not really much negative I can say about them because of just how great they've been all year. Now I will say that again, there are each let me move forward. Each bracket has it's going to be tough throughout this entire region. You have one of the best scorers in college basketball at Syracuse, and they're the 6th seed. You also have UConn at the 3. It's going to be tough, but kind of like the men's side, there's always a team or two that underachieve. There's always a team or two that should be better than they are or should have a good shot of advancing, and they don't. And on the men's side, I looked at Marquette and I looked at Kansas. On the women's side, I'm looking at Georgia Tech. I love like Virginia. When you look at the makeup of Virginia Tech, they have 2 great players in Elizabeth Kitley and Georgia Amore, and then everyone else are pretty good. The issue is we've seen too many times this year, if you take Elizabeth Kitley or you take Georgia Amore out the game, which people have been able to do, they have nowhere else to go. And Georgia Amore averaging 19 points a game, she can shoot the hell out the ball. And Elizabeth Kitley averaging 23 points a game, she dominates the paint. But again, if you take them, which we've seen on a few occasions, if you take them out the game, they have nowhere else to go. And we've also seen games where Georgia Amore struggled if she's not hitting shots or she's not getting assists, it's a long day for Georgia or Virginia Tech. A long day for Virginia Tech. I think that they'll be really good, and I'll give my prediction on how far they can make it a little bit later. But Georgia Tech, they're so reliant on 2 players. It's crazy. Kind of like Iowa. Iowa is so reliant on Caitlin Clark scoring as much as she can score. That could be problematic if she has a bad game. Now, again, her bad games seemingly are like triple doubles, but it could be a long day for a team like Georgia Tech, a team like Iowa, a team like Notre Dame, an incredibly young team. Hannah Hidalgo is one of the best scorers in college basketball, especially seeing as though she's a freshman. But if you're able to bog her down, Sonia Citron is good too, but it really goes through Hannah Hidalgo, and this is a small team. Like, I don't know. I can see teams that are kind of have one or two dominant scores like Virginia Tech, like Notre Dame, like Iowa, like USC and Juju Watkins. I can see them struggling when they're going up against a team that is a little bit more balanced than them. Don't get me wrong. I can obviously see every single one of those teams make a deep playoff run. And again, I'll give my predictions on where each team could possibly fall. But teams that are so dependent on one or two scores, especially on the women's side where the game is a little more balanced than the men's side, it can definitely cause issues, and it can definitely be concerning when you're going up against a team that is able to spread you out and that is able to lock down on your one or two best players, and other people have to do things that they're not used to doing. So those are those teams where I'm just like, I don't know, man. I could see a long road for them. That's all I'm saying. And that is, like I said, Notre Dame, Virginia Tech, Iowa, USC, those type of teams. So, yeah. Again, like the men's side, there are teams that can make deep playoff runs and deep runs, or runs that you may not expect. Now, again, the issue with the women's side compared to the men's side is there isn't as much parity. Not saying it's not great. The women's side is still great basketball, and it's still exciting every single year. And I still stand by what I said last episode, that there's more interest in the women's bracket in the women's side than there is the men's side this year. And I think that we're going to see some incredible basketball from the women's tournament. So when I say sleepers, and when I say that there are teams that could essentially make some noise, or it's less likely on the women's side. I think Utah, they have one of the best players in all of college basketball, in Alyssa Pilley. I mean, I think she put like 30 or 40 on South Carolina's head, even though they ultimately did lose. You have Kennedy McQueen. You have Gianna Nikipins. I know I said your name wrong. I apologize. Not my intent. What I'm saying is, if you have a sleeper, I think Utah has a shot of making it deep in the playoffs or deep in the tournament. They are a really good team, and they have one of the best players. I think in college basketball, especially in the women's side, if you have the best player or one of the best players, you have a really good shot of having some upsets. So Utah, even though they're like the 5th seed, I think they have a great shot. As well as UNLV. UNLV has Desiree Young, who averages almost 18 points a game, 9 rebounds. She has been incredible. You also have Kiara Jackson, who's averaging 11 points a game. When you have one of the best scorers in college basketball, you definitely have a shot of making some noise. Just like Syracuse, man. They're look. UNLV, because they have one of the best scorers in Desiree Young, and she's a center, you have a shot. Now, I know she ain't shooting no threes. I think she shoots like 29%, but she's shooting 56% from the field. That is crazy. Yeah, man, I think UNLV definitely has a shot at making some noise. And I'm going to give my home some love. Even though they were one of the last names called. Even though they had a really tough season. Even though Their record-wise doesn't seem the best, even though this is not one of Brenda Freeze's best teams. Maryland has a really good shot of making some noise, man. Whether you have Sanaya Shelder or Sellers, what am I talking about? Sanaya Sellers. You have Jakia Brown Turner, Bria McDonald. They have a squad. They have pieces that, I mean, you have 3 players that averages more than 12 points a game. That's again, it is a tough season, and they have lost some. They've lost. I'm not saying that they're going to win the national championship. What I'm saying is they can definitely make a deep run. They can maybe make it to a Sweet 16. They can maybe make it to an Elite 8. I don't know, but I will give them some love. They were one of the last names, and they have had a tough season this year. That is the Maryland Terrapins, but I think that, behind Sanaya Sellers, they can be really good. So that's a sleeper team for me. Now, who do I have winning it? Who do I have winning it? I kind of feel the same way about South Carolina. I kind of feel about South Carolina the same way I feel about UConn. It's very hard for me to watch what I've watched all year. Seeing as though South Carolina doesn't have the most dominant, as far as they don't have one scorer that's just dominant. They're just a dominant team. Camila Cardoza, Malaysia, Fillery, Ted, and Papua. I know I said your name wrong. I apologize. Alicia Watkins, Bree Hall. Like they have one, two, three, four, five, six players that average 9 or more points a game. Raven Johnson she's been really good, especially with her improvement on shooting the ball. And she leads the team in assists with pretty much 5 a game. They play like a unit. They play so well. They play like one. Camila Cardoza, even though she is their best player statistically, she isn't. It doesn't seem like she dominates the game in a sense because she doesn't have to. Everyone else helps. Like, it's just a dominating force. And it would be very, very shocking to me if they don't make it to the Final Four at least. Now, I think that how they play, they have the best shot out of anyone to make it to a Final Four. So obviously I have them in my Final Four, but I think it's going to be tough for anyone to beat that team. And I have them meeting Texas in the Final Four. Now, I will say this. There were some upsets that I had. I mean, I think Utah's has a good shot at beating Gonzaga in the second round. I think Tennessee has a really good shot of beating NC State in the second round. I think Stanford is going to beat Maryland in the second round. But I do think that Maryland is going to beat Iowa State in the first round. There are some upsets on that side, but I just think Texas has been the best overall team in the regional four. And I have them going to the Final Four, meeting up against South Carolina. Now, a team that I didn't speak much about is obviously the reigning champs in LSU. LSU has had, when you look at their record, they haven't had it down years. They're 28-5. They're second in the SEC, obviously, to South Carolina. They have 6 players. 6 players that average more than 10 points. Which, as we've obviously seen in college basketball, that's not something to just let fall. Like they have Angel Reese, Anissa Morrow,
Malaysia Williams, Flo J. Johnson, Haley Van Lith. Like, they have a squad. The issue with this squad is there are times that they play down to their competition. And there are times when, if they're not hitting shots, it's very tough for them to. I mean, they're not that good a three-point shooting team at all. But kind of like North Carolina, their ceiling, if they obviously they won national championship last year. You have a player that averages 19 and 13. They have a shot of when they're firing on all cylinders, it's almost impossible for me to see them lose. Like, it is tough. So I understand that they're on the region or regional two, which has Iowa in it, and I think that the committee obviously wants to see a rematch of last year's national championship. But I think that LSU is still good enough to make it to the Final Four, and I think that LSU is still that team that can go back to back. So I at least have them going to the Final Four. And I know I had a lot to say about Virginia Tech, and I do think that USC is in an incredibly tough bracket, whether we talk about USC or talk about Kansas, we talk about Baylor, we talk about Syracuse, UConn. I think ugh, I think this the best overall team in this bracket is UConn. The Paige Beckers, I just think that they're good enough to overcome a lot of things. Now, I will say this. If you're unable to slow down and stop Elizabeth Kitley and Georgia Amore at Virginia Tech, then you're going to have a long day. And I mean an incredibly long day. Because that's a tough duo, you know. Like, I don't know how you're going to stop that. My Final Four, I have South Carolina, Texas, LSU, and Virginia Tech. I had the Virginia Tech train last year, and I think that it's going to be an incredible game between them and UConn. I think that obviously Virginia Tech is going to beat USC, even though I think USC put the brakes on them before, or was it Stanford? Yeah, man, I changed my mind. I'm changing my mind live. I'm not. I'm going to say LSU and UConn. I think UConn is going to make it to the Final Four. So my Final Four is South Carolina, Texas, LSU, and UConn. And I have South Carolina with a rematch with LSU in the national championship. Now, on paper, it's a great matchup. We saw how it ended in the SEC championship, or SEC championship. Hopefully, all that doesn't happen again. I'm sure it probably won't happen again. But let's be real here. South Carolina has beat LSU 16 straight times. I don't know if people knew that. 16 straight times. South Carolina is obviously just one of those teams that LSU had, or they have LSU's number. And kind of like I said about UConn, I do not think there is a team that can beat South Carolina straight up. And LSU, they have the names, they have all the rest, they have the coach, Kim Mulkey, she's a great coach, but I have South Carolina winning the national championship this year on the women's side. While I do have a rematch of the SEC championship in South Carolina LSU, I essentially have South Carolina winning the national championship. So, those are my predictions. Let me know what you guys think. That's been today's episode of the Unpopular Podcast. I truly appreciate you guys. If you want a Unpopular Podcast shirt, hoodie, sweater, long sleeve joggers, link is in the description below. I have multiple different colors, multiple different designs. Get your Unpopular Podcast merch today. Also, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. I'm trying to reach as many subscribers as I can. If you like the content, tell a friend to tell a friend to tell a friend. Subscribe. It definitely means a lot. And I appreciate all the engagement that I'm getting, all positive and negative. I appreciate it all. It means a lot. Also, please subscribe to the DSPs. I understand that there are some people that just watch me on YouTube, and there's some people that just watch or listen to the DSPs. All of you guys are important. I appreciate you all. So if you do listen to the DSPs, whether that's Apple Podcasts, whether that's Spotify, whether that's SoundCloud, please subscribe. It means so much to me that you care enough to listen to me on a day-to-day. So thank you. Also, please subscribe to the socials. Please follow the Instagram, follow TikTok. I post pretty much daily there. That's where you can get to me the fastest. We can debate, we can discuss things, and it definitely means a lot. So subscribe to, you get a lot of good content with the socials. So subscribe to the socials. March Madness is here, man. I am so excited, and go Tar Heels. Go Tar Heels, man. Until next time, much love.